People tell me all the time, are you happy? Do you truly like what you do? What I tell people is the truth. If you're not happy in automotive, we're really in the people business. And if you can't find a place where you feel like you belong and can make a difference, I think that's your problem. And if you like people, it's terrific.
What's up, everyone? This is Car Dealership Guy. You're listening to the Car Dealership Guy podcast, which is my effort to give you access to the most unbiased and transparent insights into the car market. Let's get into today's episode. Brett Morgan is CEO of Morgan Auto Group, the second largest private car dealership group in the country, consisting of 66 dealerships. To put it bluntly, this was one of the most interesting conversations I've had on the CDG podcast. We discussed acquiring 60 dealerships in under 7 years, dealership profitability, how Brett compensates his management team, raising kids into generational wealth, paying over $200 million for a single Toyota dealership, why he'll only drive one type of vehicle, his blunt message to the CEO of Ford, Jim Farley, the future and challenges with EVs, and truthfully, so much more. I recommend you listen very closely because Brett drops lots of gems. But before we dive into the show, theft is plaguing dealerships nationwide, losing car keys is an unneeded cost, and searching for keys can lead to bottlenecks in the sales process. Keeper Systems has the solution for dealers. The Keeper MX is the #1 key control solution in the auto industry, handling millions of transactions per day. It features a 16-gauge steel cabinet with a built-in camera and a puck lock for additional safety, along with many other features so that dealers can know who took a key, when, and why. Keeper Systems has been in the auto industry for over 40 years and is in over 12,000 dealerships, offering exclusive key control for 6 out of 10 biggest automotive groups in the world. They have a wide range of products that fit the needs of franchise dealers, independent dealers, and even the smallest pre-owned lots. New customers can take advantage of my partnership with Keeper Systems right now to receive an exclusive discount. All you need to do is visit keepersystems.com, click on the Car Dealership Guy link, and fill out the form to receive 25% off your first key machine purchase. Or if you prefer to call, just mention Car Dealership Guy to receive your discount. Keepersystems.com, KEYPER systems.com. Wasted data is a serious issue in automotive, but data is the key to driving revenues, which means some dealers out there are just ignoring a gold mine that is staring them in the face. Let's face it, most dealerships are completely overrun with data silos. None of the data sources are integrated with each other, leaving the data as a jumbled mess instead of a clean set that could be turning into cash. FullPath solves this by gathering, cleaning, and sorting your data into one platform so you can use it to speak to your customers' needs with killer AI-powered marketing campaigns. My friends over at FullPath are breaking barriers, and I'm really excited to have them as a partner of the podcast. I believe in their product and, more importantly, in their mission to help dealers grow. FullPath can help you turn your data into dollars. Find them at fullpath.com. Brett Morgan on the CDG podcast. Brett, how are you?
Car Dealership Guy, it's great to see you. Great to be here with you.
Just the conversation we had over the last, couple minutes, man. I wish I was part of this podcast, but we'll get to a lot of juicy stuff. So I'm pumped for this. Before we get started, give us your background. I thought Morgan Auto Group, this colossal behemoth, for lack of a better term, was your family's first act. But I came to discover during my research, it's actually a second or maybe a fifth or sixth or whatever act. And I saw Tires Plus, and I had no idea that was a creation of the Morgan family. So we'd love to hear about that and kind of your family's start in the business world.
Yeah, so that's great. And I would say this, it really feels like Morgan Automotive from the narrative or my father's perspective, Larry Morgan. It's really his third entrepreneurial venture. His first was a family business with another family. So that was Merchants Tire and Auto Service Centers out of the Mid-Atlantic. So I kind of grew up not the son of a car dealer, but the son of somebody in the independent tire and auto service space. And he helped grow that family business for the merchants from I think 3 retail to 166. So that was my childhood. And at the age of around 11, I think it was 91 or 92, the family had kind of a shake up. There had been some marriages, some new blood had come into the family, and he was terminated. And it was kind of a crazy memory for me as a young guy, because it's I think my dad tells this story where I told, one of my friends, his father had gotten laid off. And I was like, that's okay. My dad got laid off too. And my dad heard me say this, and he was kind of laughing about it at the time until this day. But that was a big springboard for him to think about entrepreneurship and being in his own deal.
So wait, did you guys have any entrepreneurial genes in the family, or was Morgan Auto Group and Tires Plus, sort of an outcome from building and, having a growing appetite to have a bigger impact and, get bigger?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it's probably a better question for my father. He's always been in business, always wanted to be in business. Lives, eats, drinks, breathes the entrepreneurial dream, kind of the American dream, if you will. Is very much, his story is, a common tale of some of these legendary figures that walk around the business landscape today. But kind of going back to that time in '92 when he was terminated. He reconnected with an old mentor of his from Firestone, a guy named Don Olson, who had, I think, call it 25, 30 retail shops out of the Clearwater, Florida area, which is kind of a part of what I call the Tri-City area here in Tampa, Tampa Bay, St. Pete, Clearwater. And, he came down and was going to be an investor. And that turned out into he, borrowed the capital and bought that business when I was 12 years old.
What would you say from your perspective? I know before we get deeper into your story, like what keeps your father motivated at this point? From what I understand, he's still involved in the business, very involved. And I'm not sure exactly his age and, it's kind of stage in life, but what keeps him motivated at this point?
The reality is I think, gets highly motivated from watching other people be able to accomplish more in their life than they ever had been able to previously or ever been able to imagine. So I think for him, a large part of that drive is watching other people grow and succeed. And, this is, certainly financially, but also in their means to be able to lead others.
Have you guys ever discussed an exit strategy or like succession? Like, what does that look like for the family? Again, you're operating the second largest private car dealer group in the country. Correct me if I'm wrong. This isn't a mom and pop shop on the side of the street. So, I mean, what can you share on that? When you run something this big, how do you think about like kind of generational wealth and passing that on and keeping the legacy going?
Yeah, it's funny. It's fascinating because at some point, dad's story is going to kind of meet my story. And, the reality of life is there's some, probably some jokes in the car business that by the third generation, it's time to sell, right? And there's reasons for that. You see, and I think even one of your past guests, kind of touched on those reasons why generational businesses, trade hands, even though they are, tremendously, cash generating, incredible generational, growth opportunities, why people get out of the car business. We were very fortunate. So, Don Olson, that business became Tires Plus. The Tires Plus name came through an acquisition from a Minneapolis based company owned by a guy named Tom Gigax. And then, Larry took that name and ran with it with his growing operation. He grew Olson Tire from, 30 retail or whatever it was to 650 under the Tires Plus, banner. And some of that was through acquisition. And a lot of that was fresh brick and mortar builds too in growing markets. So it was a little bit of both. And I think a real education for him that has served Morgan well.
By this point, how many years have you been CEO of Morgan Auto Group?
So that transition was 2016, which is a pretty...
Okay. So you've been CEO for, say 7+ years. You've acquired countless stores under yourself. The group has grown and you've done incredible. And we'll get into the details shortly.
Yeah.
I'm trying to really think about the psychology of, you growing up in, under your dad's businesses and, getting some involvement. Was there a period where you felt like you sort of had this chip on your shoulder, like, oh, I'm like one of those sons in the business that kind of, people think I got into it through my dad?
Yes. And I'll talk about that. So the industry has terminology for that, and it's called PhD. Papa has a dealership. And I never...
I know a different term, but I don't think it's
I don't know if
car dealership guy appropriate.
Well, it's funny because I never heard that term. So, the opportunity to kind of get in the car business with dad, out of college, I worked for Clear Channel, which is now, of course, iHeart. I was on the programming side.
Which, by the way, that blew me away that you've been in media. So I had no idea.
Yeah, I loved it. I've got a creative side to me. I was on the programming side. I was not on the sales side. I, did 3 years at Clear Channel Richmond, or 2.5 years, around some fascinating times, SS Cole bombing, DC sniper, 9/11. I mean, I was there for some really fascinating
big stuff.
Yeah. Some good stuff. And then, Larry had sold Tires Plus, and he tried to retire, and he went and hit golf balls for a few weeks and noticed his game wasn't improving. And he was just like, he's just not a man to sit still. And a friend of his named Ed Leibowitz was on a local, back then it was SunTrust, now Truist Bank, Florida board with him. And Ed was, I think, he had married into the Brayman family. And I don't know if you know who Norman Brayman is, but huge,
Yeah.
heritage South Florida dealer, former owner of the Philadelphia Eagles. Talk about another great story in automotive. So anyway, Ed and his son-in-law, a guy named Jason Kuhn, were looking to buy some car stores. They'd been involved in a few dealerships locally. Ended up buying a Honda Volkswagen store in Tampa. And, dad was a silent minority partner. And he talked to me, hey, it's good money making opportunity. It's an interesting business. It's got some, some maybe a little bit more excitement than the traditional, tire and auto service, space. And maybe you should come down and sell cars and, figure it out. I got to, frankly, I think I came down to Florida and put the car back on the auto train and got it back to Richmond, and the new car smell and glue of the Passat, I think it got to my head, because in 3 weeks I was like, I'm coming down to Tampa, I'm selling cars. So my college roommate who played basketball at Richmond, I recruited him, and we came down a couple months later and started selling cars at the SPW Honda store.
So that was the foray into the dealership world, right?
Yeah.
So going back to that chip on the shoulder, right? Like, did you have those moments? People are like, oh, this guy's won the sperm lottery.
Yeah. Early on, I could kind of see it. But now, did I have a chip on my shoulder? Yes. It turned into maybe a problem. So yeah, it became, I'll never forget one of my earliest mentors in this business. And this was at our next store, the second store I worked in. Just one day looked at me and goes, look, kid, I get it. You'll mop the floor, you'll sell the tires and put them on, you'll stay here till midnight at night. Like, stop. Let's talk about how we can work smarter. Let's talk about where you're going. And this constant need to prove yourself is doing you a disservice.
Do you think, as a father, do you think you would follow the same type of path that you did with your dad? And, would you want your daughter, any future children, would you want them to get into the business to work from a young age?
I think, I've had to reconcile that I've had other, opportunities that other people didn't have, even if it's working in a tire warehouse. So yeah, I think, Publix isn't going to hire a 12-year-old, whether I like it or not, right? They're just not. So I think I don't regret being a part of the family business, even in that, in that respect, going back to the age of 12. I think work ethic is important. And I think if you're an entrepreneur and you have a vehicle to expose someone to that existence, I think it's extremely healthy. So now what I probably wouldn't do is be having conversations with a 15-year-old or my daughter, hypothetically someday, about, this is all going to be yours someday. And, it's just, it's too much. It's too much pressure. I loved Alan's story on your podcast about what the guy became, like a jazz promoter after his dad sold the business.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
everyone secretly wants to be a rock star anyway. People tell me all the time, are you happy? Do you truly like what you do? And what I tell people is the truth. If you're not happy in automotive, there is such a variety of, we're really in the people business, but there are so many angles, and it's a really complex, simple business. And if you can't find a place where you feel like you belong and can make a difference, I think that's your problem. That doesn't mean I've loved every job I've ever had in this business, but I just think it's great. And I've kind of relished a lot of the opportunities I've had in it, but it's just fascinating. And if you like people, it's terrific.
What was the journey like leading up to becoming CEO of the company? Tell me about that.
Yeah. So my career path, automotive specific. So I don't discount, the little time I spent as writing service in an independent tire and service shop, because that was a good experience. And I think relative to a dealership experience. So, I sold cars for 2.5 years. I met an incredible guy named Ross Bauer. He's still in our industry, but on the vendor side now. He was my general sales manager, and he kind of wrote my career plan. And I think it's a pretty common one that a lot of dealerships, at least at the time, had kind of adhered to. So I started in sales, then I became a floor manager, went from floor manager to an internet director. And obviously back in, whenever that was, 2005, that meant something a little different than what it does today, just because e-com has become so much more important part of our business. I rolled out of that experience into F&I, finance, then into used car management. So, and I think his thinking was you need that finance understanding as far as, how to get deals bought, subprime, et cetera, to be able to work the desk of a used car department. And then I went to used cars. And then we had acquired, I think, our third and fourth store. And our CFO, he was a good old Georgia boy, Russell Rouse, calls me one day and he goes, "I can't get your daddy's attention, but this dealership we just bought 8 months ago is drowning in inventory. And if somebody don't wake up, it's going to drown all of us." So I went up and talked to Russell. And look, there's parts of the business that Larry Morgan was learning what I was learning. It was really exciting times. I mean, the 20 group experience was very formidable to us understanding the car business. And I haven't even really gotten into how that happened. But anyway, I ended up going to Gainesville, Florida. We had bought a Pontiac Buick GMC store and a Honda store to kind of do a health check. And it was a disaster. I think we'd owned the store for a year. There were used cars that were a year old. There's used cars that were 9 months old, still had GMAX Smart Auction stickers on them, hadn't been reconned. New car inventory out a year. Many units out a year and a half. CIT, contracts in transit, receivables issues on wholesales, contracts in transit out 90 days. It was a dumpster fire. And we bought this Pontiac store because it came, the Honda store was really the pearl in that deal. And we left the operator who was there previously in the Pontiac store. And we wondered when we bought it why the previous dealer principal had his office in the messy old dilapidated Pontiac store and not the nice new Honda store down the street. Well, there was your answer. He needed that oversight. The other guy was a retailer, but he wasn't a general manager. And I ended up going there for like what I thought would be a couple weekends. And I left Gainesville 3.5 years later.
Wow.
And that was,
And what did you do? You took over as GM at the time?
I initially took over as GSM. I kind of had some influence over who the GM was, and then the recession hit. So I'd been there for a short time, and then kind of, 08, 09 was happening.
I think any person that you speak with that has been successful in the car business, and honestly, any business that requires, some creativity and whatnot. But I've had a very similar experience where you sort of get thrown into situations and you have to be a chameleon. That's what I call it. You kind of have to figure it out. And those are the people that are scrappy, that are able to kind of mold to the situations. And, hey, guess what? This store needs your help. And like you said, 3.5 years later, you're there, you're still there. Or whatever it may be, this department, that department, that's the people that seem to be elevated most in this business from what I've seen. And also from my experience, that was what brought a lot of value, being able to kind of put out those fires, but then build on top of that and prove yourself in a new department and just be a problem solver.
And it gave me confidence, so ultimately it's funny. I joke that I knew my dad loved me because when I first asked him if I could take over the store, because they were going to fire the GM and I was going to come back to Tampa. And I thought about it all night. And, we were still kind of in the thick of the recession. And I called my dad the next day. I said, "Let me have it." And I joke that I really knew my dad loved me because his answer was, "Let me think about it." And he really did. And I think the store had lost year to date $476,000. And we made maybe 280, 290 the following year or something.
What year was this?
Actually, you know what? It was a $1.2 million turnaround. So this was, 2010, I think. So it was a $1.2 million turnaround. So I think the store had lost something like 800, call it 800 grand, and we made 400 the next year. And man, it was a grind. That was Pontiac, obviously, went away at that time, cash for clunkers. But that was our inexpensive new car to retail. So our new car cost of goods sold, our cost of sale went to like 39 grand overnight between the GMC truck product and, Buick Enclaves. And we were basically Infinity dealers in, heavily subprime Gainesville, Florida. I mean, it's a college town. They don't want to drive, G6s. And it was just a grind. And, GM was kind of trying to retool the Buick lineup to get some lower cost, vehicles into that new car side. And you can, when you're selling 50 new cars a month, in that market doing, heavy subprime, you're not trading for a lot of nice things. So,
Mhm.
we were trying to sell 2 to 1 used to new. And I'd say 95% of our inventory was purchase car. And it, you lived this existence. So I don't need to tell you, low margins on the used car side and cry over a deal. You've got a Chevy dealer across the street who sells the same products your GMC does. So it's even for a single point market, it came with some disadvantages in that store.
What year was that? And
That,
then go ahead.
yeah, that was 2010. And then I
How many stores did you have then? How many stores did you guys have then? 2010?
to 2010, probably 5 or 6.
Got it. And today you are at 66?
66.
Got it. What are you doing nowadays? How many cars are you selling per year, new versus used? Now?
Okay, so I think last year we did 137,000 total. This year, I think we're trending like 165,000, something along those lines, new and used total.
What's the revenue on that?
So like a trailing 12 months, I can remember. So like at the end of Q1 was like 8.4 billion. And we're going to be knocking on the door of 9 billion in revenue.
9 billion in revenue. And then what's the net margin on that?
I think in terms of EBITDA, nine and a,
Okay, sure, EBITDA.
yeah,
Mhm.
9.5% EBITDA margin.
Mhm.
We stack ourselves next to the publics. We look at all their numbers.
Yeah.
We're on top of most. Certainly right in the thick from a total net margin perspective, and we do things a little differently than they do. So,
So yeah, what drives that? I mean, why are you on top of most? And like, give me the benchmarks. Go ahead. You said you do things differently. I'm curious
well,
to know more
I
about
say
that.
we do. We're just built a little differently, right? You have that AutoNation model, and it was, even Alan discussed it on a couple of pods ago with you. Of which, hey, we've got this corporate support team or this management company support. We're going to go get a GM, and he's not responsible truly for everything, so we're going to pay him less. And we don't. We pay top dollar at every position. Even COVID, post COVID. I remember sitting, on a rewards trip in Bologna, Italy, with one of the executives from one of the publics, and he was bragging about putting in these salary caps on his GMs. Well, they didn't make all that money. Like, I'm like, what does that budgeting for the next year look like? You're trying to raise the bar or get the guy to look at it, a different level of achievement, but you basically put a restrictor plate on them. Good, bad, and indifferent, we feel differently. We're going to be at the uttermost, top rankings of you know competition on pay plans. We're very decentralized. That doesn't mean,
That's the point I was just going to get at. It sounds
yeah,
like you run a very decentralized model.
which is good and bad. The great part is why we do it. We want our leaders, and we have some minority partners too. We want
Mhm.
them to feel completely empowered to the environment that they're inside of. We want them to feel like they're partners even when they're not, even when they don't have skin in the game. And we want them to feel like their hands are on all the levers that can, participate in success. And we take anything that we do from a centralized management company level, we don't take lightly. Because if it adds expense in the store, that's going to lessen our ability to hold those operators accountable. You walk into some even, single point small family dealerships, and you've talked to the operator and he's going, I've got these, miscellaneous fees, these management fees. I'm paying for the jet. I'm paying for the tickets at the game. I'm paying for this. I can't control my advertising. They own their own advertising company. I'm not allowed to choose this. I'm not allowed to do that. And at the end of the day, you've basically got a desk manager running a car store sometimes. And we feel very differently. We've done a lot to protect that. Now, having said that, as business evolves, our guys have needed our support and our help. And we realized a long time ago that being a GM is more than really any one person can accomplish. So we did start to build kind of supplemental, help, not just supervision. We have regional platform managers. We have what we call used car regional directors. We have what we call e-commerce directors that help facilitate the operations at the store level. We have a team of fixed operations kind of consultants that work with our service managers and we've got, technician recruiters. We've got two teammates that kind of facilitate the budgeting of our marketing spend in each store. And most of these folks have 12 to 15 stores each. In the case of our marketing team, I mean, they're split down the middle. They've got 33 stores apiece. It's a lot. We ask a
Mhm.
lot of our people. We pay them very well. And, but it does give that.
What's pay them well? What does an average GM make? I don't want to go like too high, too low, just like average, you have 66 stores, right? What does that look like?
Let's do the math. So trailing 12 months, at the end of Q1, I think our net profit called $800 million, right?
Mhm.
Divide that by 66.
I'm not that good. What we got? We got 12. Let's just say 12, roughly.
Right. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and we pay our guys kind of the industry standard. And we, look, there might be some allowances here and there, but
So
it's 10 grand,
12,
10 grand a month in salary and 10% of the net.
got it. So 12, let's say roughly 12 million a store, 10% and a small salary.
We have a lot of people who make a lot of money.
I'm sure you do. One thing that comes to mind is being a decentralized model. I mean, on a much smaller scale than you, but I've tested, multiple models throughout the years and just, with different types of autonomy and, independence versus kind of corporate support. It seems like, how do you even do it? Right. And what at your scale, being like, how do you run a decentralized model at such a scale without, having these, single points of failure or other things just kind of break down? I mean, there's a reason people go to a decentralized model, right? It's for, processes, having, systems, things that are sort of ingrained and make it easier to manage and scale, and have more predictability. But how do you do it? And again, I'm sure it comes down to the people, but like how?
It's
Explain that to
no,
us.
it's all people. And again, it's, we give people enough support where if they don't know the answer or they don't have that specific process or they don't, you know what I mean? It's there. There's a playbook there for our operators. But if he wants to run a different system or run in a different manner, we don't universally, support like I can think, and again, maybe this is more relevant 15 years ago than today, but like an up system. There's software that will, rotate consumers amongst your sales floor. We've never mandated anything like that. If somebody wants to run, have an internal BDC, they can have an internal BDC as long as we approve the budget and it works within our confines and the store's
Mhm.
succeeding on, we kind of have four pillars, right? So low turnover, right? So we're people animals, we manage our turnover. People don't follow rules, they follow leaders. So, turnover is a direct reflection of that leader's ability. If the stores are sales efficient, if their CSI is in good standing with the manufacturer, and then lastly, if they're on budget. And our budget's kind of our Bible, and that's gotten really complicated in kind of the post-COVID days. But we start in late November building out templates, and we have great accounting team in the peripheral and an incredible kind of what I call chief financial analyst, and then a few people under our COO. And then our entire executive team gets together, works with these operators, and we bang out this year, it'll be 66 budgets in about
Wow.
2 weeks. And I mean, we go from 8 in the morning to
So
eight at
you're
night.
looking for, yeah. And so as a GM, you're looking for, you want me to have low turnover. You want me to have a strong customer service index rating, right? For the audience
Hmm.
that's listening, and you want to
Yeah,
have pretty much deliver a good customer service and get, good ratings from the customers. And then you want it to hit budget, right? Do any of these incentivize bad behavior? For example, right? Like when I think about low turnover, is anyone throwing money at the problem, maybe exceeding budget to reduce their
sure.
turnover? Like,
Sure. Always,
yeah.
always for each action, there's an
My,
equal and
my
opposite reaction.
my brain is right away thinking about how can the system be gamed?
No, and you're not wrong. And you probably think like you should be one of our operators. It's funny. Years ago, I can remember we're very transparent. So every one of our
Yeah,
operators can see every single other one of our operators' financial statements. I mean, it's all right there for it. If you're part of our organization at
that's
the
good.
leadership, you
That's
see
good.
it all. And the same thing from a traffic management perspective. So you can tell me what, if you're sitting in Naples, Florida, what our big Honda store, our two big Honda stores in Tampa are closing on their e-com traffic and on four lead submissions. You know all that information. And it's funny because when we first started to kind of promote and community that, in the past you could just go into the CRM and get that data for your store. But when we started kind of holding it up to the light for everyone to see, man, we had people right and left trying to game the system, and they would take in, quality leads and try to reclassify them to get them out of their count to raise their close rate. So look, I mean, you're always going to get that. And you have to be
Yeah.
really careful on what drum you're banging on. Because if it has, a knee jerk reaction that can negatively affect that customer experience, profitability can't be your God, or your guide, there or all the
No,
time.
I love that. I mean, this is that nitty gritty of dealing right with
Yeah.
people and incentivizing management, and I love the transparency. I think that's huge, especially in this business. You have a lot of many dealerships that don't operate like that, and so it's really great that you just show that between the operators, and you create that competition. But of course, there could be other side effects. Tell me another thing. When we think about getting to 66 stores, what do you look for in an acquisition? I mean, you guys have grown like a weed. It's been super impressive. You've remained private. I want to talk about how you funded everything as well.
Yeah.
But what do you look for in an acquisition? Like, what are the kind of core pillars you're looking for? Are you looking for value add? Are you looking just to add cash flow? What is it for you?
Yeah. So look, they all have to stand on their own. And what I mean by that is I think if you get too formulaic, if it has to meet a particular criterion or specific formula, I think that can get you into trouble. Not everything that we bought because we saw tremendous upside. There was low hanging fruit, or we bought it because we love the brand. And I mean, there was a time, luxury stores are hard to find in Florida because AutoNation was founded here, and some of the other publics have a pretty good, foothold. So if you look at like a percentage of revenue of Morgan versus the publics, we're at like 19% of our current revenue. It comes from participating luxury dealerships. The rest is, domestic and import. But if you look at the publics, I think there's only one under 40% of revenue coming from luxury, and that's Asbury. And the
Mhm.
rest are all over 40%. So for years, we were kind of conscious of, hey, whatever we could grab that makes really good sense in the luxury space, that would be nice to have. Further diversifies us, gets us into some new brands. Typically, the margins are a little bit better on some of the luxury product. Of course, there's always a yin and yang, right? Who's Tesla been banging on? So the luxury legacy manufacturers. So I can also remember at a time where luxury was maybe 2 or 4% of our total generated revenue. So there's times we do get maybe strategic.
Mhm.
There's markets we'd love to have more throughput in. Orlando, South Florida. We've only been in South Florida for I think the past four years. Jacksonville is a market that I think is will continue to grow and would be a good market for us to be in. We dominate here in Tampa. We've got I think 23 retail in Tampa, Sarasota. We love Southwest Florida. We've got good throughput there.
So you're really looking. You're pretty much saying, hey, it's store by store basis, and you treat them all independently. You look at the opportunity.
It's got a pencil too. It does have to pencil. So again,
It sounds like the Warren Buffett mantra, no? Like buy great businesses that are mispriced or whatever, however he says that.
yeah, or fundamentally they just have different priorities than you. A very common tale in our business is generational car dealers, and I think Alan talked about this a little bit. Generational car dealers that did a great job of selling new cars. They served the factory extremely well. They were very conservative in used cars and maybe potentially F&I.
Mhm.
And, they don't have what we have, which is, interwoven into our fixed operations, which for people listening, when I say fixed operations, I mean service, parts, body shop, is, that independent streak, that independent flair. I think Larry told Automotive News in his first interview with him back in like '05 that he used to steal customers from the franchise dealers, and now he's trying to get them back. And I thought that was so funny because it's so true, right? Why do people go to a Jiffy Lube or an independent? Sometimes it's because of miseducation, but it's usually
Save
overpriced and
money.
how they're treated.
Yeah,
Yeah, they
I
want
want to
to.
save money.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they want to save
Oh,
money and they think they're treated
yeah.
better.
Why go to the franchise dealer? You can why pay the certified pre-owned markup when you could buy a used car from us? That's reconditioned just as well.
Yeah, see, I mean,
Who hasn't used that line?
yeah, you kind of live that existence on the retail side. So that's a very common tale. Somebody who's just been a really good new car dealer. So we look at their business and we're thankful they have that customer base and that throughput, but we're going, hey, what if we did one to one? We could do one to one new to used. And Al Hendrickson, you brought it up again on
The big
X.
boy. That's the for anyone listening, Al Hendrickson, that's the Toyota store that I tweeted about that Morgan Auto Group just recently purchased.
Yeah, and according to Alan, it was the largest,
Yeah.
blue sky, not multiple, largest
Blue
blue
Sky. And
sky,
again, for people listening,
enterprise.
yes,
Yeah,
that's just the value on the goodwill of
yeah,
of the dealership.
on the revenue.
Yes,
Yeah,
on the revenue.
and It's so exciting. I'll never forget the day we're all sitting down, executive team, and we're just kind of talking through it, and we're working through our pro formas. And we had, I think, we three revisions of the pro forma, and we're all sitting here. And then it came time to, and it's funny because sometimes we don't involve the whole team in the what's the offer going to be, but this one was different, so we did, and it was just great because I mean, it just numbers that my mind was really struggling. I mean, I just knew kind of what the number was going to have to be to earn that deal. But I had such confidence, like I think at the time I would tell people who doesn't want, people within our office, who doesn't want just a big, strong asset like Al Hendrickson Toyota. And what I mean by that is, even though Toyota, I think they're on the bottom end of the spectrum from a day supplies perspective.
Correct.
But you look at that, customer, what they want. They want Toyota. Toyota's been able to somehow, they've struggled a little bit getting inventory to the dealers, but it hasn't hurt, the consumers' want, will, and desire for their products. And, my second existence in the dealership world was in a Toyota store. And Southeast Toyota, again, for people listening who don't understand the nuances of the business, Southeast Toyota is the last private distributorship in the United States of, I think, any manufacturer.
Why does that matter?
Because they're different. You get a little different flavor of that typical communication with the manufacturer
As a dealer.
Yes.
And does that impact the consumer in any way? Is it like, more availability for inventory?
I think so because you have a real retail mindset that doesn't always sit at that legacy manufacturer leadership level that sits, down the street in Deerfield Beach. And I think that's a good thing for consumers because ultimately they want to sell cars, but there's, I can remember old stories, Jim Moran would take a slow moving model and he would bring it into the, their regional distribution center in Jacksonville. And he'd put a stripe on it, different wheels on it, different tires on it, and, added equipment and find a way to make it different and appealing. I remember we used to sell these XSP edition Tundras back when like chrome was the thing. And the joke was these Northeastern dealers would be calling, their Toyota rep going, I want an XSP Tundra. It's like, well, no, that's Southeast Toyota only edition. So Jim Moran, who was the owner of, SET and Jim Moran and Associates, he was a retailer at heart and kind of cared about what those consumers, wanted. He wanted to sell cars. And, that still exists to a large degree today. But again, so going back to AHT, if I could put everyone on the ground right now and do Google 360, it's a dilapidated facility. It looks like it was built before there was an image program. And I mean, I'll never forget the first day on the ground before we had bought the store. And I'm, watching, 60 customers in the service drive, and they've got these, fans above their head that really are doing nothing. They're not pushing any air, right? They're basically like the ceiling fan you'd have in your home.
No, I know you guys, it's like, you should be thrilled when you see that because it's opportunity.
I mean, they're probably using that to sell cars, right? You're not paying for the overhead of the store. As you can see, we haven't done much with it, And that's why you should buy here because I'm not, I'm not passing on our building costs to you.
It's like a contractor. It's like finding a contractor. The ones with like the white vans and like the broken bumper. It's like you want them to come because that you're not paying for the advertising that they're spending on Google, everything else.
Right. And by the way, none of that's true. When we build a nice new clean facility, none of that's true. No, the reality is we think we can enhance the experience. The throughput's great in that market there. There's a lot of upside on the service side. But, we looked at that deal and, they're selling whatever they were selling, 700, 800, 900 new cars a month. And they were selling 150 used. So we go, gosh, what if we could do maybe not 1-to-1 right away, but what if we could sell 500 used? They've got the real estate to do it. The market's there. So, one check, improvement F&I. And then on the fixed side. So I don't want people to get hung up on, it's funny. We do field calls after acquisitions, like stop driving up the market, driving up pricing. And again, Alan, I joke sometimes that the day that we were closing that deal, I said, I didn't know who was more excited, the Hendrickson family or Alan Haig, because he knew in his heart of hearts that was a record on the blue sky side. But that wasn't. There have been deals where I winced at what we were paying on the blue sky side, but not this one because I know there's more to serve in that market, in that store.
So actually, let me ask you this question. Don't you think that by not announcing the blue sky multiple or the value, people are going to assume the worst and are going to assume a higher number? Like,
I don't care what people
no, but you
assume.
just mentioned
I know you're trying to
no,
drag
no, no, no,
you're
no,
trying
no,
to
no,
drag it out of me.
not at all. No, I just think that it's already known to be a record sale, and people are, calling you, asking you why you're driving up the market. Could that work against you?
How? How? I mean, I when Alan made that announcement, I saw it on social like the day of the sale. I called Larry. I was sitting with Larry and I was like, did you tell him he could do that? Because that's just not the kind of thing that, somebody should have approved it. And Larry goes, yeah, I'm comfortable with that. I'm like, me too. What better promotion for us as acquirers than we broke the blue sky,
Correct.
we broke the
Yep.
the total amount paid for a single point, single store dealership. And look, there's other secret sauce when it comes to acquisition. I feel like that we have that the publics don't. As you've noticed, the Hendrickson family wanted that name to stay on the dealership. I'm not so sure an AutoNation or somebody else could make that agreement, could make that commitment to a family like the Hendricksons. We don't care whose name is on the store. The Morgan name only sits on one of our dealerships. We've never cared. It's not
I
about
didn't know
us.
that.
Yeah, so I think that's a thing that's helped us in acquisition. We've had one of the top 5 most profitable Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram stores in the country. It's right here in Tampa. Jerry Ohm Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram. Jerry, my daughter picks vegetables out of Jerry's garden twice annually.
Wow.
Dre, his son,
Wait, but
is one of our auditors.
Brad, I think you just mentioned something very important. This is interesting because everyone is sort of, zigging to the right on like, hey, I have to build this large dealer group, this large business, and I have to make sure it's one brand. You're saying, one second, I think there's some opportunity here. I'm not going to change the brand in every market I go into. Yes, I'm going to be leaving something on the table, which is building a consumer focused brand that everyone knows the name of potentially in Florida or the entire country, but it also provides you with an opportunity or a competitive advantage to make these acquisitions, because for that seller that wants to retain the name or that wants to have their name stay in the market, and potentially for the people in the market that want to continue doing business with that brand because maybe it means something to them or they've been buying cars there their whole life, you offer that, and I think that's unique.
Yeah, I mean, it is unique. And I think for us initially, we kind of understood it also as an opportunity or a problem, right? Like in a perfect world, we'd have Morgan on everything. Everyone would understand who our stores are and how what our network has grown to be. The reality of life is that you can't do that. So the luxury manufacturers, they dictate that it's city, it's brand and it's city name. So you think about BMW of Tampa, BMW of Sarasota, that couldn't be Morgan BMW, and having 3 Morgan BMWs could potentially confusing. We started kind of bringing that to the import realm. The first store that we acquired as Morgan was called Precision Toyota, and and I remember sitting down with Larry and our team, like, what are we going to call it? And I was like, hey, from an organic service, search perspective, what's better than Toyota Tampa Bay? I mean, this is back in 2004. Paid search is still, hardly a thing, right? Google hasn't been around very long. But I understood a little bit about organic search and just thought that would serve us better. Now you could argue it, 6 different ways, I think. But the reality is, if there's a digital pivot, you can do it no matter what the stores are named. I think Lithia has shown you that with their driveway product, right? They're going to consolidate that offering under a different digital offering. It doesn't matter what the store is called,
Yeah.
Wesley Chapel Honda or whatever, whatever it is. And I tend to agree with that. And again, if it gives the seller a better feeling about the legacy that they spent maybe an entire generation or multiple generations, their family building, why not?
How did you source this deal, this Al Hendrickson deal, which again, if I'm not mistaken, it is the second largest Toyota dealer in the country, right?
Correct. Correct. And there's been times I think they've been number 1 too. They would want me to say
Ooh.
that, over long ago. But,
So how did you source it?
no, yeah. Well, that deal came with a broker. So, Alan Haig, who's a reputable broker in our space, I'd say he's one of the,
Yeah.
certainly the top 2 between him
Friend
and
of the
Kerrigan, Aaron
podcast. Yeah.
Kerrigan. Yeah. And great guy. Again, kind of interesting crawling into his mindset. But when he sits and works with the seller and says, hey, I've got 2 or 3 people in mind, we worked hard with our relationship with Alan, so we are in consideration for those kinds of deals. We're well capitalized, and we feel like we are very organized at acquisition. Again, because of Alan and the Hendrickson family, we were able to have boots on the ground in that store months before we closed. And when you can get close to the people in the operation and already have those relationships, it does a
Mhm.
tremendous value for those existing staff, create synergies. You're hitting the ground running. You're not, making those pivots in 90 days. And they're all different. So some of them you walk in and the owner tells you, "Hey, this is my GM, but he's not very good." No, I'm dead
I
serious.
know.
I should have fired him years ago. You guys need to take care of him. You need to wax him. Thanks. This case was very different. It was, you need to get to know this GM. He's solid, he's sharp, you're going to like him. And Scott Zuckerman, and just meeting him from kind of day one, that just helped us kind of foster look, we're not perfect. That's a big, big store. We work extremely hard at acquisition, 2 calls a week. We've got a checklist 250 deep. We've got, 20, 25 Morgan associates that service the organization around a large acquisition. And then we put too many bodies on the ground, but the day we closed, we had 50 associates from other stores helping with transitions with DMS, CRM, all finance systems, DocuPad. They couldn't basically turn around without having help nearby
Mhm.
if they
Yeah,
needed.
you have this entire platform and system which allows you to, do it pretty seamlessly. It's incredible.
And I'll say this, I think we did the math since 2016 when we became kind of an entirely new, different Morgan. We've done 60% of our acquisitions have come without a broker. So on the other side of answering that question of how do you source deals, it's relationships. It's being good stewards of your community. It's having a great acquisitional reputation. We've never retraded a deal. We've had one that kind of fell apart on the closing table, not really. A week out, they wanted a cherry on top, and we weren't willing to concede. And that's the only deal in our acquisitional history that's ever fallen apart. So when you have that level of
Mhm.
trust and reputation, that's certainly something that we offer. And again, we're open-minded. We're not waiting at the door like Darth Vader with 200 stormtroopers ready to come in and we say it all the time when we first step into a store. Look, we're not prepared to run the store. You guys are going to continue to run the store. We just want to make it better, and this is how we're going to do it.
You DM'd me on Twitter, or now it's X. I think it was like a couple days after the sale, maybe a day after or whatever it got announced. What was that? You were just telling me about a little bit about, the process and kind of, I asked you a couple questions, which if you'd like, you can, share here. But what was it like for you doing this deal as CEO? Just that feeling, the night before signing, like give us that, really kind of personal feeling of doing such a big deal for the store, kind of getting to this level. You even said it yourself, like these are numbers that you're not very used to on an acquisition basis.
Yeah, this one was really special for a variety of reasons. And I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, but when we went to make our offer, we asked Alan if we could do it to the Hendrickson family in person. And Al Jr. and Al Sr., Al Sr. had actually either gifted or sold the store to his son, Al Jr. So Al Jr. was the sole, I don't think there's any problem with saying that, the sole owner of the dealership at the time. And we flew to their home. And on a Saturday morning, Larry and I went into the Hendrickson household and sat with Al Sr. and Al Jr. before they'd seen the numbers with the offer ready to present. But we wanted them to know who we were and a little bit about how we felt about us. Because that's a look, it doesn't matter to every seller. Some sellers, it's just, what are the numbers?
Yeah.
I don't care what you do with my
Yeah.
it just for whatever reason. It's a shrewd deal. And if you built something great, I guess you have the right to feel that way. But Hendrickson, I think that made an impression on them. Certainly our offer was fair because it was accepted. That was, yeah, it was surreal. Surreal because we started with the Toyota store, having it be top 2 in the United
Wait,
States,
did,
having
did
having
they
it be on kind of
did they accept on the spot?
I mean, we worked it out within and with if memory serves me correct, I don't know, I thought we shook hands that morning. I don't, for some reason, it's all a blur now, but I thought we knew by the end of the day that they were gonna sign the APA and move
I
forward with
love that.
us.
You were probably on the way back to the airport with Larry, to looking at each other, shaking hands. We got it. We got it done.
Look, what they built was special. It's a market we love, and it's just I joked, it's a big dumb asset. I mean, I've heard people say, well, shoot, give me a big volume Toyota store. I couldn't screw it up. That's not true. Look, I've seen Toyota stores lose money. But at the end of the day, this is just a huge, exciting acquisition. But yeah, so and look, there's always drama in the closing. I joke, if you were going to write a book about acquisitions, the most interesting chapter would be the negotiation about used car values, because everyone turns into a used car appraiser the day they're selling their store, and they can either be and when you have 300, 400 vehicles to appraise, that can I've seen that go a million different ways, but it can be very, very dramatic. I mean, the other assets that you're buying, it's all in the agreement, right? But, typically it's appraised,
That's the only place where it's like sort of like there's a little variance, and everyone's kind of, oh no, this car's worth more. This is less.
especially in today's, dynamic too. We had used cars over the past 3 years that were increasing in value, right? There's guys in the business who think that was normal, fascinating times. But no, that was a big acquisition. And again, we're not perfect, but we know what we have there, and we've got the guts of something really special.
How do you feel about Toyota, right? Like your biggest deal, a Toyota deal. How do you feel about the future of Toyota? They're clearly being very hesitant or just reluctant to kind of go headfirst into EVs like other manufacturers. What's your thoughts there?
I don't think they're wrong. There's some really bright people at Toyota. And I think you have to ask yourself, when will transition here, talk about EVs, what's the customer's appetite for electric vehicles, right? Because Tesla's done a really great job of selling hundreds and thousands of electronic vehicles in the United States, and kind of meeting maybe that existing need and driving more and doing it without, traditional advertising. I mean, hats off. I have, buku respect to Elon Musk and what he's built at Tesla. Having said that, I think a lot of what is driving the legacy manufacturers towards EVs is governmental, it's policy. And at some point, my fear is we're going to outkick the consumer's appetite here. And it's funny, a couple of years ago, I was dating a girl who drove a Model 3, still with the same girl. She's great. But, I'm like, I've always wanted to drive a Tesla, but I don't want to be the guy at Morgan Automotive pulling up in a Model 3. But, they're coming to the legacy manufacturers. And as soon as I don't feel like I'm taking gross profit out of one of my store's mouths, I'm going to drive one. So that was December of 21. I hopped in an EV, and I've been in it ever since.
So,
and I'll never not.
what do you drive now?
So it's a nice one. It's the EQS. It's the Mercedes EQS. I've been in it since December 21. Not necessarily a Mercedes guy. It just happened to be the one EV we had plenty of, and I wasn't, taking one from a prospective consumer. And I'll never not. My daily driver will be an EV from here moving forward.
Wow, that's a bold statement.
Yeah.
Why do you say that?
Well, okay. I think the greatest point of inflection is this. It's got nothing to do, sadly, with the environment. It's got nothing to do with, saving money, lower maintenance, because it's a non-liquid services vehicle. Nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with how it drives. When you drive an EV, you can call them, high-powered golf carts, whatever you want, and you get that instantaneous acceleration, it's tough to go back. And when I'm sitting at a stoplight and I want to, I'm merging, or, I'm making a left-hand turn and I want to beat the car in front of me, if I'm in a BMW, X6M, I might have some turbo lag. When I mash down that accelerator to beat that car, I might not know what to expect. I might, throw my head into the back seat. In an EV, it's instantaneous acceleration. It's exhilarating.
So with that said, so you like the instant torque, right? But with that said, why do you think Toyota's not making a mistake by being very reluctant to go into EV?
Look, anyone can play judge and jury there. I think the question, I saw it a little differently. Are they making a mistake in what they're saying? I think is true. I think for now, hybrid until some questions are answered, right? How they're going to recycle batteries. We all know that the mining of lithium decimates that micro environment environmentally. So I think maybe there's some conjecture of, hey, look, what if we waited a little while? What would be maybe a better time to go full bore into electric? So I think hybrid for a lot of reasons, both environmentally, from just a fuel consumption standpoint, what's good for the consumer. I think Toyota's kind of tried and true of a lot of things they're saying. And it was funny because I think you saw me, post on X recently, Farley kind of for the first time at Ford, you know, retrading some of his sentiment, right? From EV to like talking about hybrid drivetrains. And it's fascinating because there's some Toyotas you can't buy unless it's a hybrid. And that's been the truth for a long time now. I have a lot of confidence in Toyota. I've read that they've also maybe are ahead of some of the manufacturers on solid state battery technology. So it's kind of fascinating if they've got what they say they have, by the time they get to the market, maybe they'll have a kind of a second mover killer on the EV side.
I want to add, like, the way I feel about what I'm seeing with Toyota, and I could be completely wrong, but to me, it feels like they're sort of letting everyone kind of battle between each other, and they're sort of standing on the side in this like very wise strategy, potentially, where they're just saying, okay, let's let people kind of battle, lose all their money, make tons of mistakes, and then we'll ride the wave after the tide is out. We'll see what's the lay of the land, what the market really looks like, what consumers really desire long term, and we'll jump in. Now, is that will that be a mistake? Will they wait too long? Will they continue losing market share due to that as opposed to not having enough inventory? I don't know. But I think to me, it seems like that's sort of their playbook. Their sales are off the hook. There's no doubt about that. Demand is, better than it's ever been. And so they're sort of kind of, standing on the side and observing.
Yeah, for a lot of reasons, EV level disruption, it's not Apple versus BlackBerry, right? It's different. It's not an overnight transition where somebody can come in and with 18 months take 80% market share for a variety of reasons. Most of it because it's just cost prohibitive. That's the problem right now. I see in your reporting and a lot of the reporting out there, and I see it on my own lots. A lot of what the legacy manufacturers are producing, they're making incredible EVs, right? Better fit and finish than Tesla. Tech that's close to on par with what Tesla has, but they're still piling up. Why? All I can say is two things, right? Cost. The cost to acquire an EV. It seems like most of the manufacturers, we're talking MSRP price points, 45, 50, 53,000 up, right? That's a lot. That's a lot. That's an expensive vehicle. If you look at the majority of what, Tesla's market share is now, it's Model Y, Model 3, right? It's on the more affordable side. So I think, that's one thing
But
holding.
cost it's a big thing. Yeah. And what's the second thing?
Yeah. And then I think it's consumer appetite and education. People talk about, well, I've got range anxiety. I'm worried about charging. The infrastructure is not there. Well, why does that matter? Why does that matter? For $600, you can put a level 2 charger in your garage, right? You can charge just about any EV overnight, 100% on a level 2 charger. If you work, live, play within 200 miles of your home, you'll never go to a public charger. Why would you?
Yeah.
And until you've experienced it, you don't know that. And trust me, I went on my first business trip with my daughter up through Gainesville and Jacksonville, and the hotel threw me off the charger, in the middle of the night, and I've got 20% and I got to get back to Tampa. And I'm going, ooh, this isn't going to be fun. And, thank God the EVgo infrastructure that had come to Jacksonville was better than what existed in Tampa because it came later and they were 350 kilowatt chargers and I charged in 15 minutes and went home. But until you've lived it and it is a lifestyle change, you don't understand it. And that's going to take some time. Right. And again, there are other barriers to entry related to affordability, but I see that world a little differently, and I can speak very effectively out of both sides of my mouth on EVs any day of the week.
At least
that you'd like me
you're
to.
candid. Now, in terms of your stores, right? Like, are you preparing your stores for a rise in EV sales? Are you sort of kind of waiting and seeing, facility upgrades or training? What does that look like?
Yeah, and it's frustrating because a lot of I think what people want to talk about is the expense of the charging infrastructure and it's kind of being pushed down from the OEM perspective. Ford's had obviously a very robust program that got retooled because of the some pushback from the dealer body. Stellantis, we're in the we're big players with Stellantis. We've got 12 Stellantis stores, so we're in the process of pushing their EV kind of infrastructure through into our dealerships currently. So we're getting prepared for the future, but again, it's frustrating. So, here we make this commitment with Stellantis. And then in the news is, well, Florida's not going to get any 4xEs anymore. So, the Jeep product that's got it's kind of a plug-in hybrid. They're all going to go to the ZEV states, California and the zero emission states, and your customer can get one if they order one. So it's like, okay, well, what EV product are we going to get here in Florida to plug into these charges that we're about to invest $6 million in? So, there's some level of, frustration anytime somebody's mandating, something. You do need a certain level of charging infrastructure to service and sell vehicles. Don't get me wrong. Having said that, it's complex, right? Because sometimes you're going back to the substation. Sometimes you're just going back to the transformer level, but you're asking a lot of juice, out of facilities that were built in different times. And, I heard a story the other day. I think, I know it was on your podcast about the Ford dealer with the diesel generator to power his EV chargers, just so he could get Ford Lightnings and EV. And it just makes me cry laughing.
I think it's going to be interesting to see how all this unfolds, given, how supply is ramping up. Yet it seems like by the numbers, demand, and by the increasing day supply, demand for EVs is dropping. Again, Tesla being the exception. And like you said, likely almost entirely being driven to a certain extent by price. Tesla is able to manufacture those or price them at a certain point.
But anytime something doubles, you have to pay attention. Right? And new EV sales, I think, have doubled 3 years straight.
That's correct.
Or pretty close to it, right?
I think it was like 1.5 to 3 or 3 to 6 or something like that.
Yeah. So, anytime something doubles at that rate, you've got to pay attention. That's not going to happen forever. But how do people, get comfortable with a new way of doing things? Because they watch their friends, neighbors experience it. So it's coming. It's an alternative. It's out there today, and it's pretty good. You can sit around and try to poke as many holes as you want into it. But once they've figured out, I think, the affordability perspective, then it's on us to help educate our consumers and bring them over. Now, again, my issue is just, moving too hard and too fast. You're going to leave some consumers behind. And I think some of the legacy manufacturers have been criticized of maybe following that line. Mercedes, Ford, you have to be careful.
Do you think dealership profitability has peaked, or do you think we have more room to run? How do you think about this as you're growing your stores here? You're making acquisitions.
Well, if you're asking, we're same store growth animals. So, we really do focus a lot on, are we growing our throughput? Are we growing our fixed operations, measuring our capacity? How can we do more? How can that particular operation do more? So Morgan's not done growing. We're never done growing. Have dealership values peaked from, look, people in ladder 21, 22, they got lucky. They didn't win because they were good. They won because, supply was constrained.
The market. Yeah.
I had a GM tell me earlier this year, and he was right. He goes, we used to run around the showroom and joke, dial for dollars, make that the cold call engagement with our customer base and make it happen. He goes, the customer's been the one dialing for dollars the last 2 years. And it's true, right? You have this hypersensitive environment to MSRP plus pricing, all predicated upon supply constraint. Now, I do think in kind of the post-COVID Tesla world that we live in a real world of winners and losers from a brand perspective. I'm maybe more conscious of that recently. That's just my opinion. There are going to be winners and losers as a part of this, this transformation, this move to EV. There already is. There already are.
Who do you think are going to be the biggest losers?
I know the answer. I'm just trying to figure out whether I'm confident enough to say it right now. How about,
let's say who are going to be the biggest winners? Who are going to be the biggest winners?
Well, I'll tell you some of the earlier winners, and this has more to do with COVID inflation than it does EVs. But Kia and Hyundai have been great because they weren't as supply constrained as Toyota and Honda at times, and they've got really, really good product. That Telluride, I can't think of a single vehicle in the legacy manufacturer landscape of the past 5-6 years that has remained as steadily hot as a Kia Telluride. And I go everywhere and people want it, and they're hard to get for my friends and family. And we get as many as we can. And it's a great vehicle. They've done, I think, a terrific
I've also
job.
noticed that people from like all kinds of different social classes buying that, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
Like, I've just seen, I've spoken to friends and, kind of relatives and stuff, but some people that are pretty wealthy buying Tellurides. And then also, your average kind of, average person, salary job, whatever. Like I think it's very interesting how this kind of, I call it like the crossover SUV, how it's able to penetrate these different types of consumer segments.
Well, and yeah, and if you're building, is there a better compliment to give a manufacturer of motor vehicles than what you just did, right? It's a model that people want to see themselves in. It's aspirational in a sense, right? But it's also something, let's face it, when there's uncertainty in the marketplace, right? People tend to care less about the label on the front of their vehicle and what they're spending, right? And they'll play down into something as long as it represents a premium value. And that word premium just gets overused by all the manufacturers. And it used to just drive me nuts because I was a Buick dealer. I have to listen to that word every day. And I'm like, look, you're trying to play in this space between Cadillac and Chevrolet. And there's nobody who wants to play in that space, right? They want the best of the best. Somehow, Kia's been able to do that. And when there is uncertainty in the marketplace, a lot of people I think they broaden their palette of what they'll consider from a brand perspective. And brand loyalty just seems to me that it's very volatile right now. It used to be that they weren't loyal to the dealership, but they were loyal to the brand. And I don't think that's true anymore. I don't think that's true at all. I think there's a lot of brand volatility. So I think we just live in fascinating
Well, I think
times.
you have no choice. I mean, if you need a certain car at a certain price point and, one manufacturer doesn't
Yeah.
have it or it's, too expensive, you're going to go elsewhere. But do you think that Toyota's been losing market share? Now, we know that their demand is red hot. We know that they're still quote unquote supply constrained for whatever reasons,
Yeah.
whatever's happening there internally. Do you think that's long term going to be detrimental to Toyota? Or do you think that this is just them, whether, needing to work under manufacturing or realizing that the company can be just as profitable selling fewer units? How do you think about that?
I've got a lot of confidence in Toyota. I just do. They still offer products at price points that other brands don't. Certainly, if we could get more Toyotas, we'd sell more Toyotas. But the dealership body's kind of happy because it's stabilized margin, from a certain perspective. So dealership profitability is still very well. They make a great car. I think it's funny. We talked a little bit about kind of their mindset on EV. It sounds to me like in the background, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's solid state batteries and EV, they're not going to miss a step, right? They're just not. They're not going to let the world pass them by. They're just not. Not that they're too big to fail. They're just too smart not to win.
Ooh,
And
I like that. They're too smart not to
I
win.
no, they're too smart not to win. I think we used to say, a lot of these manufacturers, we used to joke all the time, like Volkswagen. I can remember, oh, it'll be 5 years before Germany figures out that, these window motors drop in these Jettas or, whatever the issue is. And I can remember Toyota, my second year in the business, we've got our GMs going to field input meetings and that data is going back to Japan. I mean, brilliant, brilliant. They are so connected to the experience of what they do. I'm not worried
Mhm.
about Toyota.
Do you have any Ford source?
We do. We have four.
What's your take? I know you mentioned Farley just a little bit. What's your take on this, like the whole like direction, brand vision, kind of murmurs of like disintermediation or kind of this direct to consumer? Like, what's your general thoughts on Ford?
I've never seen a manufacturer that unless they're just crushing it, right? Unless people are just fighting, hand over fist for the product. I've never seen a manufacturer create that much discontentment from a dealer body perspective and not have to come crawling back at some point.
Do you think it's a lost cause, or do you think a change of leadership,
No,
or
no, 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 no. And I understand a lot of what excites Farley. I think I understand, right? He's trying to, limit production and delivery costs and really trying to create some efficiencies here and deliver a better experience for the
Mhm.
consumer. His heart's in the right place. I don't look, I don't sit on the Ford dealer council, but to me it seemed like he just could have gone about, certain things differently to try to get there. And again, I've talked to a lot of Tesla consumers, that consumer experience has its pitfalls. It's not
It's
perfect.
not.
I mean, people, if they're buying a new Tesla, they call me on the trade because a lot of the local Tesla stores either put an inferior number on that vehicle or they don't know what to do with the trade. That's not a great experience. If they can't take care of the totality of what you're trying to accomplish,
Yeah.
forget about it. So again, I can kind of see both sides of the issue, but he's, yeah, too strong, too much. And now we'll kind of see maybe a little bit of walking back some of that.
Yeah, I
Having said
tweeted
that, I
about
think
that. It definitely looks like, little signals of kind of
yeah,
retracting just a little bit.
I think the product's good. I do. We finally were able to get a Lightning for my brother-in-law. And I was, I've driven one before, of course, but I mean, I think the product's good. I think the execution on the product, and that should matter because I don't think every legacy
Mhm.
manufacturer has built an EV that, yeah, that they're extremely proud of.
So before we wrap up, I mean, just on this note, still with Ford, if you have a message for Jim Farley regarding what you just mentioned, like what would it be?
Start with what the consumer wants. Start with what a Ford customer wants, and then move forward hand in hand with the dealer body on how to do a better job and take share. And I think it was the cart before the horse. I think anytime you're telling your consumer, I know what's best for you, and I don't think they were bought in on what's best for them. And there's a high look. I mean,
What do you
every
think the
EV.
consumer wants differently than what's being done right now by Ford?
I don't think the consumer is. I don't. Again, it's consumer appetite related to EVs. I think hybrid drivetrains. I think. Yeah, I don't think every consumer wants to feel like an EV is being shoved down their throat. I just don't. And then again, trying to take from a retailing perspective, a certain amount of that entrepreneurial spirit out of, sucking it out of the dealership. They put or tried to put some real constraints, and we did some legislation here in Florida that we supported that kind of, keeps that from affecting us, but really tried to bring the agency model here on the EV side. And I think that's a mistake. I think you meet that dealer that's out kicking his coverage and selling 3 times what he should in the market. There's a reason. He's treating his customers better. He's doing it at a fair price, right? And he understands the system to get the inventory. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And he messed with that. Yeah. So that's where some of the dealer discontentment comes from. But I also think, consumers, when, the leader of what they have in their driveway is just EV, 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 and trying to, maybe be like an Elon Musk type character, or could be perceived that way. I think that's danger. I think there's some danger in that.
I want to shift topics for 1 second. One thing that we haven't touched on, which I think you've done very uniquely, is the way you've capitalized the company. I don't think many private car dealer groups bring in private equity. So I just found that very interesting. I would love if you could just tell us about that experience for you. I'm going to assume that was your first time ever raising capital as well, when you brought private equity into the company. So could you kind of walk us through that?
Yeah, we had more or less a traditional debt syndication. We were building that with multiple lenders. We started Bank of America, SunTrust, very
So
similar
you're
syndication.
talking about earlier on in the Morgan or
Yes,
your
yeah,
lifetime.
from outset,
Yes.
just how
You
so how who managed our debt.
you were raising debt
And
to buy dealerships, and typically give us some more details. Like, is this debt like fixed rates, floating rates? How does this work?
well, floating rates, but I mean that's not exciting for people to hear about.
No,
But
but I just think I like the nitty gritty. So if you're typically that's how typically you've funded these acquisitions.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what a rate swap was back then. So, a lot of this wasn't necessarily in my purview. But you asked me earlier, I can tie 2 subjects together. You asked me about succession planning.
Yeah.
So dad and I had sat down and it really started to talk about what a succession plan works, which I think is hilarious because he's not he's not going to retire. He never needs to retire. There's no part of the script as long as he's competent where anyone's pushing him out the door. He is that important to the fabric of our business. So we kind of decided, look, maybe instead of a succession policy, we just go for it. Like we just get back to really growing this business. And we had a friend of dad's had called him and said, hey, I want you to take a lunch with a guy named Eric Singer. And Eric's just a friend of mine out of Michigan. He's been in and around the industry, and he's kind of I don't know how to say it. He's kind of a freelance M&A
Mhm.
guy or something. And we took this lunch, and the friend of dad's had been involved, had private equity involved in this business, and Eric wanted to introduce us to some friends of his at Blackstone, and that's obviously a big name. And it's funny, I looked it up last night. This was July 2nd, 2015. We had this lunch, and by the end of the year, Blackstone was doing due diligence on our business to get involved and support us with equity. And frankly, they just didn't have the bedside manner. They just didn't seem like our type of people. Extremely intelligent folks, and great to have those relationships and kind of see a little bit under their curtain. But we ended up doing business with a smaller house out of Rye, New York, named Greenbrier Equity, and they're traditional private equity, right? It was an investment, gave us some dry powder to do some acquisitions, and and then it's got a 5-year fund life, and it is what it is. Problem was we deployed all their capital they gave us in like a year and a half. So it's like, okay, what do we do now? Do we sit on our hands for 3.5 years, and wait for the clock to expire? Do we buy them out and then just go back and start generating, focus on our business and then just reinvest those earnings into acquisition at a later date? What do we do? And we did 19 acquisitions with Greenbrier, and we went out and kind of looking for somebody who could take out that investment and give us more capital to run. And that turned into kind of a unicorn in the capital space. Guys named Redwood Holdings, Redwood Capital, out of the Baltimore area. A guy by the name of Jim Davis, who he was the founder of the largest staffing company in the United States, Allegis, with his cousin Steve Biscotti, who's the owner of the Baltimore Ravens. And just neat people. And it's a small house, and they're through cycle guys. They don't raise funds. They're not traditional. They're not really private equity. It's really kind of like a family equity office on steroids. And they've just brought a lot of value to our business. And we've done 35 acquisitions since 2019 with Redwood. We've been the second only. We've also raised capital through a bond raise. We're the second only private auto retail group in the country to do that.
How'd that work?
I think, well, at least at that time.
Yeah, how'd that work?
That was a real education for me because that's not, I'm not an MBA guy, and we've reopened that bond twice. So I think, whatever the first bite at the apple might have been 700 million, then 300 million, then another 200 or whatever it was. We've driven a lot of capital through that bond offering. But the Redwood guys are, they're great in consult. As long as we run a good business, they're not in playing, armchair quarterback as far as operations. We talk to them all the time, and they were familiar with our space. They're also involved in the RV space. So they've got some understanding kind of the franchised retail world, and it's just been a great fit. And yeah, private equity. When we got involved with Greenbrier, it was I think Jordan Capital was running around with Rick Ford in the Midwest, acquiring some things. So you'd go to NADA, and Alan would be having a symposium with, hey, private equity is part of our business. And it took a while, I think, for the legacy manufacturers to get comfortable with private equity having any kind of equity hold on private dealership businesses. But
Really?
yeah,
Actually, I mean, I think that given there's so many publics, I wouldn't think that that's like a thing.
yeah, I mean, I think, the reality is they had some concerns. And again, when you say private equity, I think you have to be careful because again, I wouldn't put the Redwood guys under that umbrella, but it was quite an education. So to think that
It seems like I may be oversimplifying, but it seems like it feels like a bit more family office capital.
yeah, it is. And, but it turned us into that lunch meeting. I was joking with Eric Singer last night, that lunch meeting turned us into a completely different animal, and we restructured our executive team, and, I became CEO. Tom Moore, our COO, I'm trying to think when he came, it would have been maybe a year after he came to the fold as our COO. Yeah, we had to do a lot of kind of preparation for the kind of growth that we saw coming. And then we've been, moving at a clip of about, whatever it is, 8 to 10 stores a year. It's a lot.
How has your role changed throughout all this, right? Like, how is your day? How have your, kind of focus and just general duties, how has that changed for you?
Yeah, great question. When you're doing 10 acquisitions, annually, those become very time consuming. So I almost see like there's sometimes or periods of time where I have, maybe 2 or 3 jobs. And then you throw in maybe a week where we're doing bond marketing, right? So my life's gotten very fascinating in the sense that there's still the traditional operational role, right? Where we're talking about results, we're measuring, we're managing, we're communicating, what's desired. And we're also trying to, we're taking the temperature of what's going on in the market. And then we're also, acquiring. That's a very time consuming thing, from negotiating a deal, negotiating the specifics of a deal, and then kind of articulating how you're going to take that on. And we've got 2 legal guys here. Our general counsel is incredible as far as handling all the manufacturer approval stuff. But yeah, my life has changed considerably since that 2016 date, because it used to just be about, acquiring a store a year and how are we going to make our same stores better. So now it's a little bit more diverse,
Mhm.
and we've got more stores to pay attention to. So we've had to drive, I think, some efficiencies and think differently about how we do things, because time is the one asset you can't produce more of, no matter how much you'd like. And we've got an incredible team. We say it every day. It's all people. It's all people. We've got three laws at Morgan Auto Group. Okay. One is that you can't let a good person leave the company, right? If somebody's trying to leave, they've got talent, we want to hear about it, we want to talk about it. Number two is, you can't go to bed at night knowing that you have a customer that's upset and hasn't been handled. And number three is it's all people. So we have great people, and that's allowed us to facilitate this level.
Tell me more about the people, right? Like, first of all, I think those are good,
Yeah.
just great core tenets, and it's like it's so simple yet so powerful, right? Like, don't go to sleep if a customer is upset, right? Like, I remember many
Yeah.
nights of being on the phone with someone at 10 p.m. because it just freaks you out. You're like, why? I don't want to get that one
Yeah. What
bad
happened?
person tell 10 other people about some bad experience or whatever. But tell me about, like, how do you find your best people? How what has that process been like for you?
And it's a mix. Now when I look around, we have executive team members that we brought from the outside. We have a tremendous, newer HR kind of chief of people that came from one of the public companies. We've got our head of financial services, kind of the guy who runs our F&I deal. He came from a large private cap group. Our CFO was a receptionist in this business when she was 17 years old. She was a single mom at the age of 18, and we hired her as our first new hire controller in our first dealership, Toyota Tampa Bay. So she's gone from, running a store that netted, on a good month, $100,000 to, being the CFO of a nearly $9 billion revenue business, which is
What was
incredible.
that? I mean, like, that process seems crazy for someone, like, to just come in like
Yeah.
that, grow to CFO. Like, what has that process been like for her?
Um, she's had to change the way she lives. I mean, she's had to hire people to do things that she enjoys doing. I would say her ability to grow has a large amount to do with the fact that she's not really a traditional, typical CFO. She understands every nook and cranny of the car business, and it probably, you have to ask her, but it probably hasn't always been easy.
Yeah.
This wasn't, when we hired her to commandeer, at the single point Toyota store, this wasn't in the offering, right? Hey, you're gonna oversee, hundreds of millions and, a bond raise and this and that. It's, I think, been a good education for our COO. Tom Moore came through an acquisition, our third acquisition. He was an operator. He actually left us for a period of time, ran his own store, used to run a platform of stores. And, over time, it was clear that whatever we gave Tom, he didn't lose anything. And it was, strange. Sometimes people can go from a single, point environment where they're a micromanager and you put them into a larger, and they just don't know how to
Mhm.
pull the same levers that they did when they had a smaller focus of responsibility. And Tom's been someone who's been able to kind of grow with us. No, we have an incredible team. And again, it's a mix of people that have come from the outside. Joe Schluter, who's the head of our fixed operations, he was our first service director at Toyota Tampa Bay. And I can,
What I'm seeing and what I think about this business is that, especially if we're on the independent side, non-franchise, it seems like while there may be very minimal or no barriers to entry to becoming a dealer, the real barrier to entry is the people. Because it's like you said, especially you're running a very decentralized business. These people are not compensated, what they're compensated because of their good looks, right? It's because they're bringing value at the end of the day. And so it seems like everything you're saying, it's very, very non-traditional, which is, I guess it's every business, but it's neat to hear it from you because, you've sort of been in the game for so long that you've picked up these gems along the way. And so you've assembled these team of superstars that you just can't do
yeah,
overnight, right? Like, it's not like you just came out of nowhere and within 12 months, you've assembled this team. I mean, it takes time, and I think it's incredible.
I, we spend 6 hours a week just interviewing folks, even when we don't have positions
Mhm.
available,
Yep.
just making relationships, kind of
Building
trying
that
to understand
pipeline.
the talent
Yeah.
set. Yeah, look, if we hire somebody from the outside to run a Morgan store, we're going to miss 3x more with somebody from the outside than somebody we grow internally. But I promise you, back in 16, when we went from acquiring one store to acquiring 6 or 8 a year, we had to start leaning in from the outside because we outkicked our coverage on our
Yeah.
bench. Now we've got a talent bench so it's, it's like spinning plates, right? We're developing our talent internally, but we're also kind of, consistently opening up those lines of communication and making relationships with really great people in our business that frankly, we think we have a differentiated, we have something to offer them that the others don't. So we work really hard on our people. It's very time consuming but it's everything.
What do you think about independent stores? I know you guys had independent stores. I think you divested. I mean, is that a space that you mentioned used cars all the
Yeah,
time, right? But will you get back into sole independent stores?
I don't know. I don't think so. Now, granted, one of those two experiences was a bad location and we were like the fourth to fail there. So I don't know if we had some delusions of grandeur or what. Um, that's hard because I feel like, the typical retail landscape calls you a success or failure based on a 30-day period of business. And I feel like in the independent, like, right now our used car business is not great. It's just, we're running 4% margins. It can only get better, but it's been really tough to navigate. And I think you'll see, the quarterly earnings reports, a lot of publics probably haven't had a unique experience from what we've had. But the independent space, man, it's hard. So I would say first and foremost, you really need to look at how you judge your success on a longer period of time. I'm not saying a monthly financial statement's worthless. I'm just saying, when you're carrying 200 used cars and the books drop 1.5%, and you had your best manager was on a vacation in Tahiti for 2 weeks, and you've got your record. Look at Carvana. You're in the commodity business. They were ramping up at maybe the worst possible time ever, right? Running right into COVID. And I mean, you're kind of a commodities trader and you don't have that offset. You can have some offset, but you don't have that offset that the traditional, manufactured dealerships have. I think if there's one thing I could tell your listeners, it's that if you look at our revenue, 17% of our revenue is accounted from fixed operations and F&I, right? So service, parts, body shop, F&I. Only 17% of the dollars we generate comes from those worlds. It's 60% of our gross profit contribution.
60% of your profit contribution is from fixed operations, yet from a top
And
line
F&I.
and F&I.
Yeah.
But from a top line, it's only 17%. Yeah. So the bottom line here, and I think it's the right way to look at it, is that, margins are just much better on service, on F&I, and margins are much worse on used car, the used car sales themselves, parts and stuff like that.
It's your insurance policy.
Yep.
We say that all the time. And because our founder and our co-founder and chairman spent his past life understanding the value of that non-warranty customer, we tend to do that better than most. And that's a huge part of our insurance policy. There's a lot of things you can't control that factor into new and used car sales, right? Dealership values, consumer sentiment, interest rates, right? And those things can confound you in a very quick matter of time. And if they affect your consumers, they affect you. And what's wild to me is when I got into this business, average cost of sale on a used car was benchmarked at 15 grand. And it was 18 grand. And it was 22 grand. I just told you what our used car margins are, but I think our average, cost of average retail transaction price in a used car is like $33,000 last quarter.
It's incredible how it's risen.
And it's pinching the consumers. It's pinching the consumer.
Yeah, and it's coming down just tiny bit. I think it's down like 4% year over year or something like that, maybe even less.
Yeah.
But we're still we so underproduced the last couple of years. It's hard to imagine it coming down meaningfully, like double digits or an accelerated time frame. So
agree. And you'd think that would be good for dealers, but it's still a challenge.
My friend, I think we covered a lot, and this was amazing. And I really appreciate you sharing everything and also just getting a chance and opportunity to document your story. I'm not sure how much you've told that story, with you just getting into the business, growing from Tires Plus to the dealership business, but Just, really incredible journey you guys have been on. And, really happy that you came on, man. I want to ask, where can people learn more about you and Morgan Auto Group?
I'm pretty visible. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. Excuse me, X. Brett AM. Brett AM. So Brett Ashley Morgan, Brett AM TPA, which is Tampa. MorganAutoGroup.com. Yeah, I'm around, and I love engaging, with industry folks and consumers alike. So, reach out.
There it is.
Really enjoyed it.
Brett, thanks for coming on, my brother.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
Talk to you. All right. Hope you enjoyed that episode. Please give the podcast a rating, consider subscribing to the show, and check the show notes for links to what we talked about. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys next time.